Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma. My name is Nicholas Burke and I'm here with my colleague Ryan Chenke. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been working on quite some interesting stuff lately that I want to share today.
Cool. What you been working on?
I'll tease it a little bit already. I've been working on a migration guide that explains how folks can migrate from a TypeORM setup to Prisma. And we'll talk a little bit about the flow that people can apply for that. And in fact, it's not really important from where you're migrating to Prisma, because the way how you do it, kind of the high-level steps, will always look very similar. Mm-hmm. What have you been working on lately, Ryan? I think you've worked on how to GraphQL partially.
Yep. Some how to GraphQL updates. So if you are familiar with Prisma for a while, you might know that Prisma has got this tutorial site up called How to GraphQL. And the React tutorial is a bit out of date, shows kind of like the class-based way to use Apollo, etc. So I've been working on migrating that over to use Apollo Client version 3 with hooks and kind of more latest kind of flavors of using React as well. So that I've been working on. What else? I've got some talks I've been working on. I've got some upcoming talks. GraphQL Galaxy is coming up. I think we'll talk about that a bit later. But I've been working on these talks for various conferences and meetups going on. And then also some blog material for stuff like TypeScript. Wrote a TypeScript article recently and starting to delve into Svelte now too.
Ooh, that's exciting.
To write a tutorial about. So there's a fair bit going on in my world.
Very nice. Yeah, and on today's menu for the episode, we actually have a couple of things that we want to talk about. So, of course, we'll talk about Tuesday's release that came with a couple of relevant changes for people that have been using Prisma already. So we'll talk about what the upgrade process can look like and some more exciting features that we've included in this release. And we have a surprise guest in this episode. I won't say a lot more, but we'll have him on right after we are done talking about the release. And then I think other than that, we don't have too much else to talk about today. So if anybody has some questions that they would like us to respond to, drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of this episode. All right, Ryan, let's dive into this week's release as usual.
Let's do it.
I am going to share my screen. There you go. And increasing the font a little bit. So let's quickly walk through all the different things that have changed or that we released on Tuesday. So first and foremost, and I think that's a really exciting one, is that Prisma Studio is now available as a standalone app for macOS. That means that you can actually install it on your computer as you would with any other application and then just launch it basically from the Finder. And I'll quickly show you later how that's done. We also introduced a Codemods package that helps you with upgrading your code base after a Prisma release. And that comes in especially handy when there are breaking changes in a release. And we had a few of those in this release as well. So the Codemods package really comes at a good time here to help you upgrade to 2.12, the latest version. Then we were able to pair two preview features that we released in the last two releases, actually. So 2 releases ago, we released preview support for SQL Server. And in the last release, we released preview support for native database types. But until this release, you actually weren't able to use the two together. But now you are, just by specifying both preview flags in your Prisma schema. And then we also want to make sure that you are aware that Prisma Migrate is coming. This has by far been the most requested feature since we launched the initial beta version of Prisma 2 back in March. People have been asking us for Prisma Migrate because it really completes the package of Prisma as a database toolkit, as a full-blown package that helps you with all your different database workflows. Once Prisma Migrate is there, then you really can cover all the workflows that an application developer has with a database with Prisma. And then the breaking changes, I won't talk about them in too much detail right now, as you'll go through that later on when you're showing how to use the Codemods. So just quickly scrolling over that. So let's go and very quickly talk about Prisma Studio. So as I said, it's now available as a standalone app for macOS. And the way how you can access it is by navigating to the releases page in the Studio repo. And then if you're a Mac user, of course, you're used to downloading DMG files on your computer. Then you can just drag this into the application folder. So you can download it from here. I already did that. I already went through these steps, and I can actually go ahead and open Prisma Studio now through the Finder. And
what a beautiful icon for macOS.
Yes, yeah, it's really nice. As usual, our design team has really excelled on the entire design of Studio. So, like, not only the visuals and the graphics here, but also the actual UI of viewing and modifying data, I think, is also really outstanding. And there is really no other kind of database GUI that gives you the same feeling of working with a modern application. Like, it always feels like these other kind of database GUIs, they always come from the 90s and have like a very low abstraction level. And with Prisma Studio, it feels like there finally is something that like really feels like all the other modern applications that I'm using on my Mac, like VS Code or Chrome. So I think Studio now is like available like this, and that's awesome. So the way how that works is that instead of running it from the terminal with the Prisma Studio command as you had to do before, you actually can now open it. You can open a Prisma schema from your file system. And in this particular case, I have a file system, like a Prisma schema that belonged to a tutorial about Next.js that I wrote this week. And I'll just double click on that Prisma schema. And it's going to open the database for me. So that's a remote database that's hosted on Heroku that I can now view through Prisma Studio here. And we know all the different workflows. We can open the different Prisma models that map to certain tables in the database. Right here. And then, of course, we can use all the functionality of Prisma Studio that we're already used to, like filters, field selection, pagination, adding and deleting data, specifying relations from one model to another. So we really finally have a way to do all of this in a standalone app. One thing that's not yet working and that I created an issue for today is to use your keyboard to like navigate between tabs. So I'm really used to hitting Command Shift and then the square brackets to kind of navigate left and right in my tabs. That's not yet supported, but the issue is already there. Like hopefully this is going to come soon. And this also just goes to show that whenever you have an idea or a feature request or a problem with a tool that we are building, really the best way to make us aware of that is by creating GitHub issues, because our entire engineering process is happening on GitHub. And once you create that issue, it's going to be persisted, and you can be sure that our product and engineering teams are at least looking at it and then considering it for their planning and prioritizing it. So even if you work at Prisma, that's kind of the standard approach for how we are suggesting things to the product team. Just go ahead and create GitHub issues.
Love it. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, how do you get in an issue your key, your key commands like you've done there to render like that?
That's one of my favorite Markdown tricks, actually. I'm using the keyboard HTML tag.
Oh, interesting.
And if you're lucky and the Markdown renderer that you're using supports it, it comes out beautiful. Like this. We even actually also support it in the Prisma docs. I brought up the same issue there a while ago, and it only took a couple of days until we supported it there. And in GitHub, it's also supported, and I believe in Stack Overflow as well. So,
cool.
Whenever I have the opportunity to write a keyboard shortcut somewhere in Markdown, I definitely always make sure to use these HTML tags.
Nice. My other question was, do you know if we can change the types for a column in Prisma Studio? I was looking for this when I was checking out the native types in the last release. Can we affect the actual column types here? I wasn't able to find it, but maybe I missed it.
You mean that we would change this field that's currently of type Boolean, for example, to a string or an int?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So that would effectively be the same as running a migration, right? I mean, it would mean that we would change the database schema underneath, right? Because what this is just a reflection of the Prisma schema, and in that regard, also a reflection of the underlying database.
Yeah.
If you wanted to change the type here, I guess you would have to change it inside your schema, right?
Yeah, I guess maybe it was sort of maybe the case that I was testing out maybe is a bit of a moot point, because I needed to change the field types in an editor so that I could then introspect to pull out those native types. But I guess once we're all set with native types, it's not really going to be a thing anyway. You wouldn't do that anyway. You would just affect your model and then migrate it to. You wouldn't ever work in the other direction, presumably.
Right.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, these are the kinds of ideas that are floating around when we're talking about the future of Prisma Studio, that eventually it might be possible to run migrations through Prisma Studio, or have a schema designer. So these are the kinds of ideas that are floating around when we're talking about Prisma Studio and potential features that we could add. But it's really unclear at this point what the future features are going to be that we're building for Studio. But of course, if anybody from the folks that are watching this has ideas, again, the best place to put these ideas is actually in the Studio repo to tell us what you would like to see there. And if you feel that it's an important feature to change the types here of a column immediately, then by all means, just go ahead and create a GitHub issue for it.
For sure. Do we want to talk at all about the Microsoft SQL Server types? I know we don't have much to show, but anything else to say there?
I don't think that we need to talk about it in detail, since 2 releases ago, I think we showed a demo of SQL Server. Last release, I think you gave a great overview of native types, and people can basically just go back to these 2 episodes. We also always add timestamps to the recordings after the fact, so that you can also just quickly navigate to these sections in previous videos if you're curious about that. But I don't think we have to talk about that today, because it only brings together 2 features that already existed before and that we already discussed before, even on the stream.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, I can start talking about breaking changes if you like.
Yeah, let's do that.
Share screen. You can see that?
There it is, yes.
Perfect. So breaking changes. Here's what we've got. Some things have changed in terms of what you would use from Prisma Client. Some things have changed for what you would do in your schema. So I think what we'll do is kind of go over them a little bit, talk about them, Niko and I, and then we can show a little demo of something new that we've got, which is a code mod package, which helps you to basically fix those breaking changes, or most of them anyway, without much effort on your side. So the first one here to talk about is the removal of the non-dollar methods. So if you recall, oh man, which release was it? 2.6 or 7 or something, where we decided to deprecate the Prisma methods that weren't prefixed by $1. We introduced this new way of calling some Prisma methods, like the middleware's method where you'd call use, or what's another good example? Connect, right? These methods. We prefix them with $1, and the reason to do that is because if you had something in your model that went by the same name, you would then get collisions between these things when you had your generated types. So methods are prefixed by $, now, and that meant that until this release, if you were still using those methods not prefixed by the $, you could still do so, but it's now been removed, the ability to do that. It was deprecated before, it's removed now. So you have to put that $1 there, and there's a very easy way to do it with Codemods, which we'll see. Let's talk about this one. One-to-one relations must now have an optional side. And so the idea here is that it used to be possible for like your virtual Prisma relations to be required. But I think the problem is that if you had like a one-to-one relation between two models, having them be required all the time isn't actually correct, because if you're to create something like a profile in this case, or let's say a user, if you're to create a user before a profile exists, then that doesn't really make sense for it to be required. It has to be optional. So the update that we made now is that, like, if you've got a virtual relation here, you have to have this be an optional relation. I think that captures it. Niko, do you have any more detail on that you wanted to mention? I know that's kind of surface level. Maybe is there anything more to say on that?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest reason why we added that requirement was actually because required one-to-one relations are actually not possible in plain SQL. So if you were to model a relation just like usually with SQL and not with Prisma, then it's actually not possible to express a required one-to-one relation. And that's because you only configure the foreign key of a relation in a relational database on one side. And the fact that you can add the second side in Prisma is just the convenience that we provide you on top. But making the second relation field, that virtual relation field, required actually led to a couple of problems with a few edge cases where you would start, for example, with an existing database. And that's why we decided to add that requirement and make the Prisma schema a little bit more strict here. But on the other hand, also like saving people from very nasty kind of scenarios where it would be really like where they would get their database probably in a really weird state that would be awful to debug. So we just like put on a little bit more kind of the safety measures here to be on the safe side.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. The next thing here is a fix for JSON fields in your database. So I guess the issue, and I never ran into this because I hadn't used this in the past, but JSON arrays were stored as strings in the database, and now it's like the correct, it's properly encoded now. So now JSON arrays are properly encoded as JSON in the database. So I don't know, did you run into any issues with this, Niko, in the past? I haven't actually used this myself.
Me neither. And from what I've heard, there really were only very few users that had been running into this issue in the first place. Yeah, we did add this here, but I don't actually think that this breaking change is affecting a lot of people. And we even have like this call to action in the release notes there to like actually comment in the existing issue if you need help with the upgrade here.
Cool. Excellent. Moving on to the deprecations here. This is one that probably many of us will see because I think many people use the find one method. It's been deprecated. It's been renamed to find unique. And the issue here is in what developers would anticipate by the name of the find one method. So it's easy to think that like if you are using find one and you pass a where clause, you might find then the first you might pull out the first record that matches that in your database, whereas really find unique is the name that is more proper for this, where you're passing a where clause to look for something that is unique in your database. So it's been renamed to find unique. You'll see it show up as deprecated, and if you're using VS Code, it'll have the line through it in 2.12. And this is another thing that is fixed by the Codemods package, which we'll see. Really, you just kind of swap one name for the other. In 2.12. The next thing to talk about here is the Prisma namespace. So here's a good example. If you were pulling out something like your like a create input type for one of your models, so a user create input or a post create input, it's nice, but you can pull these out. You can set your input types as that create input type, and then you know what to expect when you're calling create here. That is changing somewhat in that most of these kinds of types are moving under this Prisma namespace, this top level Prisma namespace. Things like your actual model types, so the type that is generated from a user model or a post model or whatever your table model is, those are still exported as they typically were before. But everything else now is underneath this Prisma namespace. So something to be aware of that you now have to call Prisma dot, whatever you're looking for. So another thing that is fixed with Codemods, and we'll see that in a sec. I'm looking through to see what else we've got here. Let's see. There's a bunch of stuff that I don't think we'll go into detail really with here. What else was on our list though there, Niko? Was there anything else to call out before we check out the Codemods?
I don't think so. I think you can you can go and jump right in, showing that upgrade path with Codemods.
Let's do that. Oopsie, I'm gonna go over here. All right, so the idea here is I've got just a little sample application with some deprecated stuff. And you can see what's deprecated because it's got the line through it. So here's that example where I am pulling in post create input, which comes from the type that is generated in our node modules. And I'm just realizing I may have actually deleted node modules as oh, there it is.
I really love how kind of VS Code is helping you here and how it's just striking through the deprecated methods.
Yeah.
This just like makes for such a great experience. So like one big argument, another big argument for folks to use VS Code if they don't already use it.
Yeah, totally. And that goes, it's a very good improvement to VS Code. Like it's kind of along the lines of one of my favorite things, which is if you're not using something, it gets dimmed like that. When that came around, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much, look at all this code I've written that I don't actually use. So good at showing me the errors of my ways. Anyhow, we've got this type, post create input gets exported. This was generated by running Prisma generate to go on my model, look what's in there, generate types for me. And you used to be able to do this, pull it in and use it, for example, in your function, arguments if you want to put it there or wherever you need it. But now you've got to pull it in differently. So that's one thing that's changed, like we just talked about. The other one here that has changed that I'll show, we're going to show this in kind of two stages. The other thing that's changed, of course, is find one is deprecated in favor of find unique. So if you've got a project where you've got these all over the place, you don't want to do it by hand, you can use the code mod that we've got. And so it's here at this namespace at Prisma/Codemods. You'll find it there on NPM, on GitHub. It's Prisma/Codemods. And there's a couple of different ways you can use it. Like you can pick off individual updates that you want to do. Or you can do a sweeping update to target a specific release, in this case 2.12. And that will then go through your project and look for stuff. I'm going to run it right now. It's not going to work. I want to show you the behavior here. If you run this, if you've got uncommitted changes, you're going to get a message about it. And so I just want to demonstrate what this is going to do. It does take a second to run, so we'll let that go. And what we should see is it'll kind of go through everything that it would do. But by the time it gets to the end, you get this message. Before we continue, please stash or commit your changes. So, simple fix is just stash or commit or whatever. You can also use the force flag. Not a good idea to do that. Instead, commit your changes. That way you've got history. And once you've got that, you can run it. And we'll take a look at what happens here. Keep your eye on the stuff that's got the strike throughs. With the magic of Codemods, we'll get that fixed up in a sec.
All right, people have already been commenting about the Codemods here in the comments, and in general, they seem to be happy. So, for example, Clement says that he just used it 5 minutes ago, and it worked perfectly for transforming find one to find unique.
Amazing. That's what we like to hear. Here it is. Find unique is called now, and we have swapped out the post create input that was there directly with calling it from the namespace, which was imported here. So it cleans up your code, makes your code do the stuff that it's got to do. One thing I wanted to show is that if you've got stuff like this is what I found. I don't know if maybe this is expected behavior, maybe not. But if I were to run the code mod against something that is now not available in a Prisma release, then it's not going to actually work for this. So what I mean by that is I'm on Prisma 2.12 in this case. What I would need to do to get it to work, at least I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I would need to do for the Prisma CLI, I would do at 2.11. I would get that installed. I would do the same thing, clients 2.11. I do, so there I generated, or did I? npx Prisma generate. There I've generated. Oh, you know what? I've got issues with my log file, I bet. Always comes down to package.lock or package-lock.
Your old friend or nemesis.
Let's do it. Install. There we go. I'm on 2.11 now, and I've got the strike throughs for all this stuff that I was using. And so what I want to just test here and make sure of, and this might, oops, I need Prisma, of course, might be an important point for you if you're going from 2.11, is that if you wanted to, you'd have to be on Prisma 2.11 and then target your 2.12 update with the code mod to actually get this to run. At least that's the behavior that seems to be happening for me. I don't know if you've seen this, Niko.
I haven't looked into that flow too much yet, so I really don't want to make any statements about this at this point, I think, but might be worth following up internally with the team and then potentially, if needed, just create a GitHub issue. But yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, of course, I've got to, all right, we're almost done. Let's force this. And we'll be on our way. You'll just see these Prisma method calls be updated here. And yeah, this code mod package is really cool. I've seen the value already from it.
Yeah, it's perfect. I've also seen
for me that I've actually come to know what a code mod is. I did not know until very recently.
I've also seen this from other tools already. So, for example, Next also has a code mod with kind of similar functionality.
So this is interesting. It didn't actually update. This worked for me earlier. I don't know why it's not working now. In any case, what I just wanted to call out there is that when you're going to update your dollar methods here, if you're on 2.12 and you've got a bunch of non-dollar methods around, you may get interesting results. Might just be my environment, might be something like that. But if you see anything, that doesn't seem right, please do reach out to us, file an issue, etc. Yeah, I think that's about it for the Codemod. Anything else you wanted to see, Niko?
I don't think so. That was a great overview. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that with that, it's time for our guest. Let me introduce you to Spiros. Hey,
Hello,
Spiros.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to the show.
How are you? Thank you. Thanks for having me. How are you doing today? I love what you like. This Codemods tool. That was amazing. It's a great tool, and it's one of these examples where a lot of different tools from a company, from different teams, come to work well together. Like this other VS Code extension where you saw the strike through. That's something that came from our amazing Carmen, works on the VS Code extension, and it's this small details that really
shout out to Carmen. Yeah, it's very nice. And I think also that our users appreciate that, because from time to time, it just happens that we have to release breaking changes. I mean, like in this particular release, we actually kind of bundled up a few of them that we just dragged on for a while. And we just took this release as an opportunity to just push out a bunch of these, clean up the code base, clean up the API a little bit to make it smoother and prepare it for future releases again. So I think it'll happen every once in a while that we need to release these breaking changes, and that's where Codemods can come in really handy. All right, Spiros, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce your last name. I'm just going to make a fool of myself. But you are based in Greece, I think, right? Maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about when and how you joined Prisma, actually, because you're also a new employee at Prisma. Like we didn't mention that before. Just who are you and how did you come to join us?
Absolutely. So to start with, it's pronounced Martzoukos, which is a great name. I had a lot of fun in Berlin, which is where I was located for 6 years before I came back to Athens about 1 year ago with my family. So I'm working, as you can see from this here, I'm working as a product manager at Prisma. I joined about 1 month ago. My background is in tech. I was working in the past as a front-end developer and designer. The closest thing I got to work that resembles Prisma was PHP MyAdmin, that far back with this WordPress site where you have to look at the database and this ugly, but useful too. And of course, Active Record with Rails, which resembles the client. After that, last years at Berlin, I was working at Contentful as a product manager. And this is where I started getting more into product management, which is what I have been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And at Prisma, I'm working with a team called Developer Productivity. What we are doing here is we're trying to at least at the beginning, repackage the different tools that Prisma offers. And this VS Code extension was like one example. Another example was this Electron app that we offered for the Studio app. What we try to do is we want to make people more productive as fast and as easy as possible with Prisma. And this was a good example of doing that. So we have freed up more workflows outside of your CLI by repackaging and rebundling the Studio into this standalone native app. So now you can just double click and open it without looking into your CLI.
All right. So you were basically the mastermind behind putting out Studio as an Electron app, so to say.
Yeah, I was not the mastermind, but I did see through the release.
One of the driving forces, let's put it like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, very cool. So to reiterate, you are on the productivity team here at Prisma. You're working on things that improve developer productivity, like Studio, just bringing workflows from the CLI into more of a graphical user interface. And you also said that I think the VS Code extension is part of what you kind of oversee in the developer productivity team. Was there like anything else that's like worth mentioning in the in that context, or are these at the moment the biggest two kind of initiatives or tools that you're focusing on?
So this is also a new team. So these are the tools that we have inherited by the formation of this team, and we are maintaining and also looking forward into extending. You mentioned some great ideas before, and we are indeed considering some of these. But of course, as always, open an issue. Let us know which of these use cases are most relevant to you. But we're also in this context of repackaging, reusing existing tools in order to free up more workflows. We're of course considering other paths like a web path, a cloud flow, which we're very excited to see what kind of possibilities this could offer. Something like, for example, Prisma Studio on the cloud as a start could be an interesting path forward, which could open up other doors also in the future where we don't reject the possibility that we might also build other tools for that. I'm really looking forward to see what will come out of this discovery. That's something of the mid-term path. So let's say the next few sprints, couple of months, there might be something interesting up there.
Very cool. Yeah, and of course, as usual, the call to action for anybody who has ideas, go ahead and create GitHub issues, because that is where we are pulling our ideas from when we evaluate them and when we decide what we're going to build next. So that's really the best way to get in touch. And of course, we also have a gigantic Slack community and a very active Slack community where you're all invited to join. And in fact, we also have a dedicated channel that's kind of mostly monitored by our product team that Spiros is also part of. It's the product feedback channel that you can join there, and like where you can share ideas and provide feedback for existing tools. All right, Spiros, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience, or should we wrap up here?
Product feedback. we live, we feed, we strive on product feedback. Anything, whether it is good or positive or a new idea or something that anything that you want to share with us, just make sure you talk to us, and we'll make sure to listen and build the proper solution to your needs. That's what we're here for.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for coming on, Spiros. It was great to have you on.
Thanks, Spiros.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
See you later.
You too.
All right.
Right. So we got a couple more things. Hey, you wanted to talk about TypeORM.
Yes, and in particular about the migration guide that I have been working on, and a couple of other things that might be relevant for folks to learn about the migration process from another database library to Prisma in general. So let me go ahead and share my
Before you do that, can you give me your Nicholas Burke pitch on why a person should migrate from TypeORM to Prisma? What do you tell people?
I can talk about that in a second. Let me focus on adding my screen here. All right. Why you would want to migrate from TypeORM to Prisma? I think for me, the biggest reason really is the increased level of type safety that Prisma can guarantee. And besides that, also two more reasons. I think the developer experience that you have with the Prisma tools, and also the active community, the rich documentation and examples that help you get started, and actually like useful support that when you raise a question on GitHub or on Slack, we actually have people that like monitor these channels, and that will get back to you as fast as possible to help you out with these kinds of issues that you might be running into, or just responding to your questions. So that would be the very short version of that, and we could dive into the specifics. But I think for me, one of the biggest reasons is indeed just the level of type safety. For me, type safety is just a must-have for any kind of serious application that I would be building. And as soon as more than one person is involved, then I think it's just like such a productivity boost on the long run that you really don't want to miss it in a project.
Totally.
But I mean, TypeORM isn't has actually been the pioneer of TypeScript ORMs, right? It was the first ORM to really embrace TypeScript, and in that sense, it was the first to provide a certain level of type safety guarantees to people. And I think that by itself is already really nice. And we are just kind of building up on trying to actually build up on that now, and trying to find the scenarios where maybe the type safety guarantees provided by TypeORM might fall short, and see how we can fill these kinds of holes. But I first want to talk a little bit more about the migration process from another tool to Prisma in general. And if you've been following our documentation, you might have seen this new page that we added in the guides section of the documentation. It's called Migrate from TypeORM, and it explains the process for the migration. And at this point, I want to emphasize that no matter from which tool, database, library, or other ORM you're migrating to Prisma, these steps will always look the same. And it's also not really important as to whether you're building a REST API and which framework or library you're using like this. So whether you might be using an HTTP framework like Express, Core, or Nest, or if you're building a GraphQL API with Apollo server, whether you're using Type GraphQL or Nexus, it's really not relevant which or what kind of application you're actually building. These steps, they will always be the same, because the way how you start integrating Prisma into a project always follows that approach. So let's look at these steps on a high level, and then just look through the guide here as kind of a sample. So the first thing to do is that you have to install the Prisma CLI, because that's how you control all your Prisma workflows, starting with kind of initializing your project, to introspecting your database, to migrating your database later on, or generating Prisma client. So the Prisma CLI is kind of the first step that you go through when you migrate over to Prisma. And once the CLI is installed, you can go ahead and use it and apply the init command in order to create your basic Prisma setup. When you run this command, the CLI is going to create two files for you. One is called schema.prisma, your Prisma schema file, and a .env file for your environment variables to configure the database connection URL. And the next thing then, of course, is that you have to set your database connection URL. And here you can see how kind of the connection info from TypeORM that you provide in your config file for TypeORM, how that maps to different versions of the database connection URL format that's used by Prisma. So for example, for Postgres, looks like this. This maps to this. For MySQL, it maps to this, so that you can easily figure out what you have to provide as the database URL here. Then the next step is that you have to run Prisma's introspection, which is going to read your current database schema and pull in the tables as Prisma models into your schema file. And in this case, it actually also pulled the TypeORM migrations table, which is just used by TypeORM to store kind of a migration history. You can just delete that from your Prisma schema manually, but it'll appear when you introspect the database. And that's just because Prisma reads all your database tables and transforms them into Prisma models. So here I'm using kind of like a sample application with a familiar data model for a blogging application with post, users, categories, and profiles. It looks like this. Like one thing you'll notice is that we're not really following the typical Prisma naming conventions here that are typically using Pascal case for model names and and camel case for field names. But you can just go ahead and make these changes yourself. So you can rename everything manually. You can use add@map to map a certain model to a specific table name in your database. And that's how you can kind of adhere to all the naming conventions that are typically applied when using Prisma. The next step is that you install Prisma Client via npm. And then you can already get started. And basically now is the point where you can really adopt Prisma incrementally in your application by gradually replacing your existing database queries with the new Prisma Client queries. And in fact, if you want to have an overview of how you can replace those, we have this API comparison page in the documentation that shows you how a TypeORM query maps to a Prisma query. So you can use that as guidance. And here, even in the guide, I also have a couple of examples that show you how to transform certain queries from Prisma to from TypeORM to Prisma. This entire thing is also associated with a repository. We seem to have issues here with the rendering of markdown links. I'll look into that later, but this is the repo that's associated with the guide. And if you look at the pull request here, then you can quickly see on a high level also just the differences between the two projects. So of course, the Prisma schema is an entirely new file, but then you can see how the code is actually changing per file from TypeORM to Prisma. And then I want to give you a very quick preview of something that is currently going on as well. That's going to enrich the API comparison page. And that's, I alluded to that a little bit earlier already. In our docs repo, I started working on this to enrich this comparison page with TypeORM to not only show the API comparison, but to actually also provide some more info on, for example, the different levels of type safety that TypeORM and Prisma can guarantee. Where did I? Wait, I have to go to the preview and concepts here, I guess. Now it should come here. So we're moving that page to another location in the site nav. And here I started with a write-up where I'm comparing the levels of type safety that TypeORM and Prisma can provide. And here's an example. For example, when you're selecting fields with TypeORM, you don't get full type safety after you loaded a model from the database. In this case, I'm using the find method from TypeORM to retrieve all the published posts from the database, but I only select the ID and the title of the posts that are being returned. However, the return type that's known to the TypeScript compiler of that call is actually a post array. And that's a problem because post is actually defined with more fields than just the ones that we selected, which are ID and title. There are also content and published and author. And the TypeScript compiler is not going to hinder me from accessing these properties on the returned post objects. So here, if I now grab the first post of the returned list and I would try to access the content property on that post object, well, I would get a runtime error with this message where it says cannot read property length of undefined, and that's just because content doesn't actually exist on the object that has been returned because it wasn't included in that selection. So TypeORM cannot guarantee the type safety of these kinds of queries because it just sees, or it only can tell the TypeScript compiler that the returned objects are of type post, when in fact they are not, because they just have ID and title. With Prisma, of course, this is solved. It's a solved problem because we kind of we generate the return types for these queries on the fly. That means that if you're including a select call like this, the type of the published posts right here will be generated on the fly, and it'll look like this. So it will be an array of objects that only have an ID and a title. So this kind of code here, it would not even compile. So the error, it would already be caught at compile time, and therefore would save us some time debugging a production application, because we already know what went wrong at the time when we were writing the code for this. And of course, there are more scenarios that I'm mapping out, but I just wanted to give you this as a little bit of a teaser. And once the page is published, you can view all the different scenarios where Prisma can provide more guarantees in terms of type safety compared to TypeORM.
That looks really great. That's a very extensive document too. I think people will benefit from that quite a bit.
Yeah, I really try to go into detail there, because the question has been raised a few times in our community as well, in terms of where exactly the differences are in the guarantees that both tools provide. And so I hope that this is going to be instructive for folks who are curious about exactly that and how that works.
Like it. Awesome. Should we talk about some things to wrap up? Maybe some events that are upcoming?
I think so. What is upcoming? What's on the list, Ryan?
Let's look at that. And I can share screen, actually. Where are we? Actually, yeah. Can you pop my screen in there? I think it's still up.
Yes. Let me do that. There you go.
Let me know if you can see it.
Yes. Looks great.
All right. So a few events. Shameless plug for myself. I'm speaking at a few things coming up. Front End Connect. This is an event that is coming up. What's the date for this one? Let's see. The 8th and 9th of December. So I'll be doing a talk on TypeScript for your whole application. So like if you're a front-end developer and you dabble with the back end as well, what it looks like to get TypeScript across your whole application, starting at the database and then, protecting yourself with type safety all across your app, all across your stack, essentially. So that's coming up, Front End Connect. Check it out. There's also GraphQL Galaxy. This one is the 7th and 8th of December. There's me right there. That's kind of a cool animation. There are a bunch of great GraphQL speakers at this one. Lots of people that are well known in the community, so there should be a lot of great talk. And
I can spot two. So I can spot two GraphQL inventors right off the bat: Nick Schrock and Dan Schaefer.
And Dan.
Yeah, really awesome guys, and always up for great talks. So I've really enjoyed their past talks at the GraphQL Europe conferences, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. So lots of great speakers here. I'm doing a talk on Nexus, building your GraphQL APIs faster with Nexus schema. So, you may have seen me talk about these things at other events, but come on out anyway. Check it out. So those two are coming up first week, I guess, second week of December. So hope to see you there. And then we want to talk about this kind of meetup open mic session thing that we've got happening called Advanced TypeScript Trickery. And that's December 1st. So that's Tuesday, next Tuesday. And the idea here is it's like an open mic format. You come and share your experiences with TypeScript that might be helpful for the community. This is streamed directly to YouTube. So it'll be on YouTube afterwards. And yeah, come check it out. You can go to this meetup. I don't know if you want to post this, maybe Niko in the chat, but there's meetup.com/advanced TypeScript trickery. That's where you can find it. Yeah, if you want to present on something, there's a Typeform link to fill out here. And that's the idea with that. Those I think are the events that we've got to talk about that are upcoming. I don't know what else do we have to talk about. Niko, anything else?
I don't think so. I think probably worth mentioning that we are aiming for a preview release of Prisma Migrate this year. So just keep your eyes open for that. It's probably not going to take too long anymore until we have something ready. And of course, you can already use that upcoming preview version of Prisma Migrate by opting into our early access program. Where you can find all the info in a Notion document. I just shared the link for that again in the chat. So you actually don't have to subscribe anywhere or so in order to join this early access program. All you need to do is open this Notion document and follow the instructions there. And with that, I think we are coming to the end of the episode, Ryan.
Cool.
Awesome. And
it's been a pleasure, like always.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. And I want to close today with a couple of closing words that I stole from my colleague Tim, who said that at the end of a meeting. He improvised it, but I actually just thought it was pretty nice. So in whatever time zone you are, have a good time. Bye.
Oh, there you go. That's great.
Have a good day.
I like it. Awesome. Well, have a good time in your time zone, Niko. Have a good evening, and I will see you on Slack and see you in the next 2 weeks here.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.